Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar, Security Supply Chain Compromises, an interactive simulation. This event, brought to you by Security Magazine, is sponsored by Immersive Labs Corporation. Thanks for joining us. Today's presenters joining us from Immersive Labs Corporation are Paul Bentham, Chief Product Officer, Kev Breen, Director of Cyber Threat Research, and Chris Pace, Technology Advocate. Don't forget to submit your questions, and later in the program, our presenters will address as many as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived on securitymagazine.com. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's presenters.
Thank you very much, Maria. Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us, wherever you're joining us from, or whatever time of day it is for you. Just to explain what's going to happen over the next 45 minutes or so, this is what we call a cyber crisis simulation. It's interactive, so the idea is that we want you to join in with us, and it is basically going to step us into a scenario and is going to ask us to make decisions as we move through that scenario. And in this case, the scenario is inspired by the recent SUNBURST supply chain compromise. You'll notice straight away as Kev shares his screen, at the top of this screen there is a URL and an exercise code. You can go there either on your browser or on your mobile device, and you can enter that URL and sign in with that code, and that will allow you to play along with us. We'll open the questions for you to vote, so that we can see what your responses would be, as well as talking through how we plan to answer the questions. So, whilst some of you are making your way into play along, I'm going to introduce my two colleagues. First of all, Kev Breen. Kev is driving, so it's Kev who's sharing his screen and will be taking us through the scenario, and Paul, who in this case will be taking the role of a CISO. So Kev is going to be our kind of hands-on security guy at the front line for us. Kev is also going to fill in some bits of information as we move through the scenario. I will be the kind of moderator, the dungeon master, if you like, and Paul will take the role of the CISO. So I can see a few of you are logging in. That's great, but I encourage as many of you as possible to log in there, because trust me, it will make the experience a lot better if you're logged in. All right, Kev, do you want to hit the big blue button? We will start the exercise. So just to give us to orient ourselves at the beginning of this scenario. So we have seen from attacks like SUNBURST that even a highly secured, well-patched environment is still at risk, particularly from a very novel or pernicious threat. And the scenario that we're going to walk through is inspired by those real-life events. So in this scenario, we are going to focus on making decisions that balance the risk to our organization with the facts that we have available to hand. How quickly can we investigate what the compromising of software in our supply chain really means to the security of our business, and what actions, if any, do we need to take? Kev, if you just expand that bit where it shows our role, and we can all understand where we find ourselves. So our imaginary company here is called Cash Money. I don't know if you see what we did there, but it's a large US-based financial services company. We're a multinational business. We have hundreds of offices, thousands of employees, and as CISO, let's all imagine that with Paul, we're taking the role of the CISO. It's our job to work with security professionals in our team to ensure and respond to cyber threats. We also take responsibility for communicating the potential impact and the actions that we're going to take to the CEO and to the wider board. So that's the role that we find ourselves in, and let's see where this scenario begins and what we're going to be asked to do first. Okay. So it's the holidays. We're looking forward to time off with our family as the festive season approaches, and just hours before we receive a threat intelligence briefing. Renowned cybersecurity company IceNose, there's a lot of very clever wordplay here that I'm picking up on, has released an advisory. They're alerting users of network management software, Mars 3.01, that has been compromised by a highly effective threat actor group who have opened a backdoor in the product. We know that we have this software installed somewhere on our network where it's used to manage both network and domain services. So what should we do? Right, Kev, open up those options. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is ask you to open the voting, and then I'm going to go through these available options one by one, and then, Paul, I'm going to come to you and see what you're thinking. Okay, option one, we need to find out how embedded this appliance is in our operations. How involved is this software with our day-to-day operations? Is it highly active? Do we need to find out how much credential access it has? Do we know which other parts of our network and cloud infrastructure it might be talking to? Do we find out if it's able to talk to the internet? If it can't talk out to the internet, it becomes less of a problem. Or do we just turn it off? Having understood that it clearly, we've had this threat intelligence briefing, it clearly poses a risk, we should just turn it off. We should just turn it off now. So, Paul, over to you first. With the available intelligence that we have, what are your immediate thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. I guess the first thing I'm thinking here is the kind of how much risk am I willing to take on? I mean, 4 is an obviously tempting option just to turn this thing off. That's a security risk. But of course, the impact of doing that, there's impact in doing that. So then I kind of, that makes me sort of feel a little bit more inclined towards going towards options. So options 1, options 2, options 3, those are going to give me a little bit more information about how much risk I'm carrying by leaving this thing on.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing that occurs is that if you haven't found out how embedded it is, you don't actually know how easy it is to turn it off or not. It could be that if it's, if you're looking at option 1 or option 2, if it turns out that those things, that are actually not an issue, then it makes it much easier to head towards option 4, I suppose. Again, this feels like a balance of risk against available intel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I probably draw Kevin at option 3 as to whether how can option 3 help us out?
Yeah, so option 3 is kind of an interesting one. For this one, we go back a little bit to the advisory that came out. So most people are going to be familiar with a standard kind of attack against your infrastructure. So somebody from the outside attacks your infrastructure. So maybe you've got a VPN SSL appliance, maybe you've got a web application that's internet facing, and somebody attacks those and gains access into your organization via that vector. What we're talking about here and what this threat report gives us is this is actually a supply chain compromise. So the thing on the inside is already affected when we installed it. That then connects out to the attacker without the attacker having to take any action against us. So option 3 becomes really important because if this host has 0 internet connectivity, it will be impossible for it to have connected to the attacker. In that case, we have it dramatically changes our potential response.
Okay, so based on what we do or don't know at this point, Paul, I'm going to let you be the ultimate decider, to use the words of George Bush Jr., George W. Bush. You're going to be the decider. So what are you going to nail your colours to at this point, knowing what we know? Well, actually, what we don't know, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, option 2 is obviously very interesting in terms of credential access. That's lateral movement within our network, isn't it? But I think fundamentally we need to find out more. So I'm going to put my, I'm going to trust Kev for now and think that he's going to be able to find out how more embedded this appliance is in our operation. So I'm going to lean towards option 1, Chris.
So we're leaning towards option 1. Okay, we've had 14 people vote. The clock is ticking. Well, we've chosen option 1. Let's see where the audience has gone, Kev. It was a really interesting split, and I wonder how many people felt that option 2 was, as you said, Paul, kind of alluded to lateral movement and the risk of it. How kind of really option 1 and option 2 are very similar, and I can see how perhaps we would have gone down that route. But Paul, you've committed us to option 1, so that's the that's the route that we're taking. I'm not going to let the audience be responsible for any of our potential failures. You're going to have to wear them all.
What?
Okay, so it's a good answer. It's a great answer, in fact. It's vital that we understand how heavily used and interconnected this compromised software is in our operations. This insight will enable us to balance our decisions as the situation evolves and decide what to do next. So this is a great moment for us to just pause and consider what we just did. We chose a route to go down. Then it's really important, I think, to highlight that there really are not wrong answers in the context of these kinds of scenarios. Largely because if you were doing something like this in your own organisation, for example, there are lots of variables. There are lots of things that would factor in that aren't factoring in our kind of imaginary conversation. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning is that you'll see on the right hand side there, you've got these kind of indications of our they're kind of indicators of different things that are going to change dynamically as we move through the scenario. So you can see we've got our risk appetite there. We've got the available intelligence that we have. So we're going to see whether that, based on the decisions we make, goes up or down. We've got our operational effectiveness there. So again, potentially the more time we invest in certain things, that's going to impact on our operational effectiveness. The more risky the decisions are that we make, so our risk appetite is going to increase. I suppose you might argue our risk appetite has gone up here because we've decided at this stage not to intervene. We're looking to gather intelligence to find out what's going on, and we'll see these change as we move through the scenario. The other thing is that the scenario is dynamic, so we could make an early decision that might take us down a road that means we get a certain, we basically take a certain route through the narrative. And the idea of that is to, try to make it more interesting and engaging, but is also designed to kind of give the idea that there are consequences to the decisions that are made. So this isn't linear, this is dynamic. Okay, Kev, do you want to go on to the next inject? Okay. So IT operations have told us that this device is core to managing our network. It connects to all our Cisco devices, gosh, this seems bad, routers and VPNs, and it also has access to the domain controllers. Ironically, the update that we applied that meant it's broken actually fixed the security vulnerability. We now really need to find out whether we have an affected version or not, and then decide whether we should take any action. So we are going to reveal the available options here, and let's have a look and see. Kev, open up that voting. All right, so here are our options. Option 1, prevent the NMS from communicating with the internet. This will mean we aren't connected to any attacker infrastructure. Option 2, investigate further using available indicators of compromise. We already know there are some out there that could help us understand more about our current situation. Or option 3, roll back. We might be able to continue using the NMS securely by rolling it back to a pre-patched state. Or should we, at this moment, this is now the time to turn it off. I know that it can feel the voting bar comes up over the last option. I seem to remember that in a lot of cases, the last option is nearly always turn it off as we move through this scenario. So you won't be missing what that choice is. But in this case, option 4, if you want to have it available to you, is to turn it off. So, Paul, where do you think this leaves us? I don't feel actually like we don't know much more about the threat than we did. I think situationally, we now understand that this could potentially be quite a big problem for us. I'm not sure how much it changes what our next course of action might be. So what are your feelings, Paul?
Yeah, I know. I'm inclined to agree, Chris. We don't know. We know that it's potentially worse in that this thing is more critical to the way that our company's networking infrastructure works, and that it's got all the credentials to all our important parts of our infrastructure. I guess right now I've got to be crossing my fingers that we don't have an affected version, frankly. So I'm looking at these options. I think, whilst I might have been a bit more tempted to take some action in the first place, options 4 of turning it off or option 3 of rolling back kind of feel like we're kind of shooting in the dark a little bit. So that kind of leads me to think either we do some more investigation to see whether we've got an affected version, whether there's been some sort of compromise looking at those IOCs, or we take a kind of risk based approach to try and prevent, assume that it is compromised. Let's disconnect it from its masters and stem any data leakage.
Yeah, I mean, Kev, it feels like in a lot of cases, option 3 would be the right one here in a sort of in the kind of traditional, we have a vulnerability kind of, which we need to address. So can you explain to us why it's potentially different, why the rollback is maybe different to how it would be in the case of a traditional attack?
Yeah, so again, with this one, so we've got to remember we're still fairly early into this crisis. So we're definitely within the first hour. So we're still, from the security team perspective, I'm still trying to read through all of the available reporting that's being released. The media is starting to pick up and they're starting to put their spin. So I'm trying to pull through, and figure out which is FUD and which is valid. And one of the really key takeaways from this is that this wasn't a thing that happened today. This was actually a thing that happened several months ago. So those patches, those updates, those attacker actions actually happened several months ago. So what that means is if we were running a vulnerable version and we were targeted by the attackers, rolling back is going to make very little difference at this point because they've already got access, and one of the first things they will undoubtedly have done is moved laterally and gained a second form of persistence, probably with some valid credentials. So rollback is probably going to do very little for us in this kind of scenario, this supply chain compromise kind of attack.
Now, Paul, I heard you leaning towards option 2. Now, the job of the kind of moderator, the facilitator in these kind of exercises is obviously to poke away at your decision a little bit. And so I'm going to do that now by saying, isn't option 1 the least, address the potential risk more effectively than doing more investigation? I'm not saying I think your answer's right or wrong. I'm just throwing it out there for something for you to mull over out loud.
I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? I think disconnecting it from the internet kind of prevents us from managing it. It takes away any of our kind of support operations on these sides of things. It is quite a drastic action. I'm not entirely sure that we know what that will do as well. Like, will it have some secondary side effects that's going to create extra issues for us? And, we don't know that it's an affected version right now. So wouldn't it be better for us to sort of learn a bit more and on that kind of balance of risk element, actually, let's just not take any action right now and let's understand more about what we're doing.
Yeah, I hear you headed towards option 2. Kev, let's
Please.
Reveal what the audience has to.
Let's hope the audience have helped me out here. Well, thank you, audience.
Yeah, I think that I was just kind of throwing out there that idea that there might be a. I suppose we're not in a real crisis in this context, but it feels like in a crisis there may be sometimes the tendency to rush to feel the need to do something. And option 1 kind of gave us that. It gave us that route, to feel like we had enacted some, mitigation of some kind. Whereas actually, I think you're probably right, and the audience has agreed that we just don't have enough information to know whether that would have been the right or wrong thing to do. Okay, let's take a look. Sorry, go on, Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that's unique about having Kev on this with his technical advice is that, of course, he makes option 3, the rollback option, seem like a good problem to have that we're not rolling back. Whereas what he's basically saying here is the attackers have been in the system 7 months, so it's kind of pointless. And that's a good thing somehow, which is a kind of an interesting perspective on this, I think.
Well, I suppose this is where the nature of this supply chain, this is what, in a way, is what's so sort of unnerving about the nature of this hack compromise, is that, as I said at the beginning, organizations that were, fully patched, they would call themselves completely protected, highly secured. There was a gap here that back to the whole everything is vulnerable thing. There was a gap here that was exploited, and so of course this is a whole different ball game. This kind of exercise is a whole different ball game, and I think that's what's so interesting about the waiting and finding out. Almost. What is it? Wait and hurry up and wait kind of thing, for the information to become available before deciding what to do. So yes, here, rushing to action without at least attempting to get all of the readily available facts would be too risky. Open source resources and intelligence at least give us an opportunity to fill some of the gaps in our knowledge. And you'll notice here that clearly this has increased our risk appetite somewhat, because we are leaving that system connected without really knowing what it's doing. Our available intelligence has clearly increased, but we are now investing quite a lot of time in addressing this incident and putting a lot of resource on it. So obviously that has the potential to hurt our kind of operational effectiveness. Okay, next. So our SOC and incident response teams have now investigated further, and they can confirm we do have an affected version of the software. The software vendor themselves says that over 18,000 instances of that NMS have been potentially affected by this compromise. And at this very moment, US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that is CISA, have released a statement advising government organisations to turn off the software. They say affected versions should be powered down or removed from networks. So Kev is going to reveal the options, and then we're going to take a pause at this moment to actually look more closely at the indicators of compromise themselves. So at this point, we're sort of headed right to the technical now. So we're going to be taking a look at the threat itself and how we can see whether we have the affected version. And Kev is going to do this inside a virtual machine. Do you want to explain what you're spinning up here, Kev, and what we're going to look at?
So one of the things that happened when this incident happened, when all of the threat reports came out, was there was some very clear research released by ICE knows in our example, but by FireEye in practice. And what they did is they said that this is the exact DLL file that has been compromised by the attackers. This is exactly where it sits on an affected host. And then they gave some indicators of compromise. And this was a pack that contains a set of Yara rules for doing some signature-based detection against files, and a set of Snort or Suricata rules, which can be used to look at network traffic. And to go back to the point very quickly, so the vendor came out and said 18,000 organizations had an active license. That means that they would have automatically downloaded and had the subscription to the updates. So there is a possibility that we wouldn't have received that. There was something like 135,000 active accounts, but only 18,000 of them were vulnerable. So we can very quickly identify whether our specific version that's installed is vulnerable. So there are a couple of different ways of doing this. In this example, the scenario we've set you in is that your network team or your IT operations team has gone to the device. They've grabbed the DLL files that you've asked them to, and you've transferred these off of that host and onto an analyst machine here. You could just as easily take the tools to the host and run them there, but it's typically a bit safer to bring them to an analyst machine. In here, we've got the actual indicators that have been released, and we have some of the real DLL files. So I'm just going to very quickly, I'm going to use Yara with the Yara rules, and I'm going to scan that business layer DLL file. And what this output here tells me is that it has matched 4 of those signatures. Those signatures are very high fidelity, as in there's very little that could give you a false positive hit. So if all 4 of those signatures have hit, you can almost guarantee that you do have an affected version. That doesn't necessarily mean you're compromised, but you do have an affected version. From here, we can go a bit deeper, so we can start pulling file sums and checksums. We can compare them against VirusTotal and other open source intelligence. And we're just trying to increase that picture to enrich that data that we've got, so it can help, so I can help Paul make some more informed decisions.
Okay. Thanks, Kev. Okay, so having understood, it seems that if we imagine we're moving through that exercise ourselves, that our SOC are coming back and telling us like we have the potential that we're affected by this, and so that then leaves us with these decisions to make. Okay, do you want to open up the voting? So these are our available options. Option 1, we must turn it off now. The government says so. This is our clearest indication yet. This is a big problem. We should just take their advice. Option 2, remove the software. We should just uninstall it from the host. We can install something else or update when it's safe to do so. Option 3, we should prevent it from communicating with the internet. At least we would know it can't communicate with any malicious infrastructure. Or option 4, we now look to gather basic intelligence on the threat actor. Although CISA is suggesting that government agencies remove the software, we might not be a target. So, Paul, what are you thinking when you see these options?
Well, straight away, I'm thinking we're sort of 3 injects of the way through this whole crisis, and I'm thinking that things are getting a bit serious now, and I feel like I ought to be doing something. Like the kind of like asking Kev for more and more information. It's given me some good indicators now that we've got the compromised affected version. I really do feel like I need to be doing something. So then just looking at these options, I don't think I do it because the government tells me to do so. Removing the software feels like it's something that I get Kev's view on a little bit more in detail, but I don't feel like that's going to help, especially because it's been compromised for a long time. Same with option 3. So perhaps I'm starting to look towards option 4. So could we understand a bit more about the threat actor? I understand a bit more about whether or not, whilst we do have a compromised version, the probabilities in our favour, in that there's 18,000 of them, surely they haven't gone after us, have they? And let's find out a bit more about that.
I suppose the other thing that, and Kev, I'll let you jump in and talk a bit about techniques and what we know so far at this in a second. But I suppose what you're describing there is, again, you're talking about the balance of probability, and that feels to me like the balance of risk, right? If this is a thing that is going to involve an investment from the threat actor in order to get whatever it is that they need, and we think that this is a thing that is affecting government agencies and government organisations more than it's affecting the private sector. And remember, we are a financial services company, so there might be an argument that they have, less interest in us. Then it's more about it's kind of the probability of risk, isn't it? It's, in fact, option 4 lets us at least find out before potentially making a rash decision. Kev, what are your feelings?
Yeah, so we kind of go back to some more of the reporting. So we've started to get a clearer picture of what's actually happened based on the open source reporting. And of those 18,000 organizations, we know that, and this number changes every couple of days, but it's only about 250 of those organizations were actually compromised. And we'll see it in a moment when we talk about the next the DLL. But one of the things the attackers did when they set up this entire attack cycle is they took a lot of deliberate actions to stay under the radar. So the way they coded it, the way they built the URLs and the C2 infrastructure, everything they did was about staying quiet, staying under the radar. That includes their selection of targets, which is why of those 18,000, only a very small percentage, I think it's less than 2%, were actually targeted. So at this point, it's a balance of risk, like we said. We are 7 months behind when this attack actually took place or would have taken place. So taking another half an hour to do a bit more investigation might not be the end of the world.
Yeah, I'm going option 4. Option
Okay,
4,
yeah.
please don't, Chris. But Kev, we're going to have words about how you let them be in the system.
Okay, so the audience agrees. So let's select option 4 and move on. I'm aware we're a smidge behind the curve timing wise. This is a good answer. Any more insight we can gather to understand the likely risk will help us inform the decisions that we make. So our available intelligence is going up, as is our appetite for risk. But we're impacting on our sort of operational efficiency by the focus that we're putting on this. Okay, so our threat intelligence team provides a brief summary. Victims have included government, consulting, technology, telecom, extractive entities, which I'll fill you in, it means oil and gas, in North America, Europe and the Middle East. And this threat actor prefers to maintain a light malware footprint, instead preferring legitimate credentials and system tools to establish a foothold, which actually alludes to something we were talking about at the previous inject. So we know the compromised DLL that we have in our system is beaconing. That's triggered automatically, and we know that it's been doing that for around 7 months. So Kev, I'm going to ask you to just very briefly give us this a little look at the analysis. Don't feel the need to dive too deeply here. Perhaps just give us a kind of an overview of what we can find out from the DLL itself.
So one of the really interesting things that came out as part of the analysis is that, like we said before, the attackers took a lot of deliberate actions to stay quiet, to stay anonymous. All of the code they wrote into this backdoor DLL file matched the syntax and the stylistic behaviors of the actual development team, which means anybody doing a code review would be less likely to see it. But one of the things they did, like I said, this thing connects out to the attacker. It's not the attacker connecting to your infrastructure. So in order for the attackers to do some of that target selection, what they did is inside here, there's a domain generation algorithm. And that's a clever piece of code that takes information from the host and the host network and then constructs what looks like a random AWS EC2 URL. And then that's what it connects to. Based on that, the attackers can get some kind of information from you. So we know what the C2 beacon domains were. They're well documented, but we don't know what that custom URL for us was. What this lab allows us to do is allows us to take that DLL file, to read through the information, to identify the point where that domain is constructed. We can then reverse engineer that domain generation algorithm. We can identify what that exact URL would be for our environment, and then we can take that over to the network team. They can check the logs, and then we can determine, were we actually compromised? Were those second stage C2s ever hit? So it just helps us get a much clearer view of our network rather than looking at the information from other people's networks. This lab allows you to do that in a fully contained environment where even running that DLL file, there's no internet access, so you're not going to be able to affect anything other than the local machine.
And just thinking about it, if we take a pause for a moment outside of the scenario and think about what we've been able to do so far. So although we're kind of doing in some ways a sort of traditional tabletop exercise, albeit more interactive and interesting, we're able to add these technical elements as well. So the exercise doesn't just become for a decision maker, at the board level or at the incident management level. It also becomes exercises that technical teams can go through as well to make this feel more real. And obviously all that helps with preparing for a response, if the worst is to happen. Okay, let's have a look at what our choices are then, Kev, having understood a bit more about it. So we can either take the risk and leave it running. We can deploy extra security controls. So we said right at the beginning we were worried about credentialed access and lateral movement. Let's enforce wholesale password changes just to help us mitigate that risk. Or is now the moment to turn it off? Even if us being breached is unlikely, we should do everything we can to protect ourselves. We have to take it down. So these are the three options, Paul. Do you want to talk us through your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'm just kind of still disappointed in the fact that they've been in the network for 7 months, but taking the risk and leaving it running doesn't really feel like it's a massive risk right now. So kind of in a kind of fairly let's wait and let's play this thing out. it's unlikely with financial services. The threat intel doesn't say that financial services are a target. So there's quite a temptation there to just play it out a little longer. All that being said, I'm starting to feel the pressure from my colleagues in the C-suite. This is a risk. It's starting to make news. The government have told us to turn it off. So really, I'm looking at doing something. That's kind of where I'm at. So, look, I mean, deploying extra security controls, I think you've said it, Kev, already. That kind of lateral movement, it feels like there's a lot of things for me to worry about there. And option 3, I'm gonna suggest that maybe option 3 is not as great an idea, again because of the kind of controls that this thing has, but also I guess, Kev, forensics might be really helpful for us if we were to leave the thing on.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things at play here. So first of all, if you do decide to go the route of turn it off, then turning it off is not the right thing to do. Disconnecting it and isolating it from a network is the right approach to take here. So somebody physically goes and removes the network cable from that host, leaving it powered on. There's a lot of vital information we can gain by not turning it off. So things like memory dumps, memory forensics, looking at the cache and the files. A lot of that could be destroyed when we turn it off. So physically turning it off should definitely be something you take with a very heavy hand. We know that one of the first actions an attacker is going to take is to move off of that host and set themselves somewhere else where if we do turn that off, if we do update it again to replace those files, the attackers are still in. So for me, actually, at this point, a bigger threat is their legitimate access. So I've got my SOC running alerts on those rules. I might even have put an IPS rule on my network sensors to block all traffic to those domains we identified when we did the DLL analysis. So we're blocking that traffic at the network layer. So actually, I want to go and I want to reset all my passwords. I want to make sure that service accounts, I want to look for anomalous accounts, because that's going to stop the attacker if they have done that lateral movement. And we know from the available information on this threat actor that is what they've been doing. So for me, option 2 is the biggest security impact that we can have right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with him. Yeah, let's go 2.
Let's go option 2. Let's see what the audience had to say. Well, with option 2, let's go. Okay, we can, now we've done some of the technical stuff, we can start to pick up the pace here a bit, chaps, as we come towards the end. So yeah, good answer. We understand enough about how the threat actor works. We can mitigate now. Okay, so we now have another problem. One of the passwords that we just changed is used with a VPN config script via group policy, and parts of our cache operations use this VPN for secured access. They are now unable to connect in order to process transactions. So this is a big impact on operational effectiveness. So what do we do now? Kev, do you want to reveal those options and open the voting? And I'll go through them very quickly. So option 1, deploy resource from our IT operations team to fix it. It will mean manually making the change to the password in a number of different places. Roll back this single password change. It's a single quick fix, but it undoes the security benefits. Or option 3, put up with it for now. So just for clarity, option 1 takes more time and effort. Option 2 is quick, but undoes the security change that we made in that particular area. Or option 3 just means we have to put up with that impact on operational effectiveness for now, to focus on what we're really dealing with. So let's do this quick. Paul, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking this is a horrible inject that you've constructed to give me a really hard question here. I mean, this is literally the balance between operational effectiveness and security. I mean, Kev's going to be all about who cares how much it costs, get an army of people out there fixing it, no security compromise. Obviously we're not going to put up with it, but because I'm I've got the political pressure and my bosses on my case, I'm option 2, that sacrifice only one password. How bad can it be?
Okay, option 2. Let's see what the audience had to say, and then we'll commit.
Come on, audience. Oh, dear. An audience of security pros here, haven't we?
Security professionals.
They're with me.
But we're going with Paul, so we're going to pick up.
Well, what? Oh, can't we go? No.
Okay, we never want to undo a change made to increase security, but the impact on business operations would have been too great to bear. It's most likely we'll look at allocating resources to make this change more gracefully later on. So really, everyone was right. Okay, next inject. Okay, we've dealt with the password issue, but we still have this hacked DLL beaconing from our NMS. What does it really mean? We know for sure that the software is compromised, but that's not the same as us being breached. Is the potential that we could be further compromised? Is it a good enough reason to take down an integral part of our network? What should we do? So let's have a look at the options. So there it is again, option 1, turn it off. Even if it mitigates against the tiniest of risk, we should do it. Option 2, do nothing. Turning it off is like shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Or option 3, we should now ramp up our investigation. Putting resources into threat hunting could help us discover more malicious activity. So, Paul, what do we think?
Well, I think I've had enough of this whole scenario. So, and frankly, it is not acceptable for us to continue. This thing's beaconing out. I'm not doing nothing. Ramping up investigations. I think it's given us some interesting geekery, but it hasn't really taught me anything that's going to help my business. And frankly, I think it's time to turn it off.
Yeah, Scott. So Scott, in the questions, and he's been contributing the whole way through. I haven't had time to, because we're so behind, Scott. We haven't had time to come to your input. But I can say this: Scott has basically said that essentially now is the moment. We don't have the big picture. Others do. We only have our small picture. Maybe now is the time to make a call and to shut it down. So let's see what the audience says. People have had enough time to vote. I realise I'm rattling up the pace because we want to make sure that we get to the end of the scenario. Oh, everyone else.
They're all with me.
They're all with Kev.
Option 3 is kind of technically the right answer, but the reason Paul's chosen option 1 is that it's much better for the scenario. It's way better for the story if we choose option 1. So despite the fact that we know potentially that it's a terrible answer, we are gonna go for option 1. So let's show the impact.
Oh, what a weak answer!
Whilst this option seems to address the risk most currently seen as the pressing one, it doesn't take into account that. Can you see where this is going, Paul? It doesn't take into account the potential knock-on effects of taking such drastic action. Okay, come on, Kev, next.
I feel like I've fallen for your trap here.
My elephant trap. We've received an alert from Cisco. They have disclosed a CVE with a CVSS score of 8.9. This means a number of routers we have in our network are currently vulnerable to remote code execution. And this vulnerability has already been seen in the wild. We need to install a patch. We would normally use the network management software that we just turned off. What should we do? Let's have a look at our options. Okay, do we leave them unpatched? We already have our hands full. Do we manually apply the patch? This is still a pretty serious risk. We should just get the patch out manually. Or do we turn the NMS back on? It will be much more time intensive to do this manually for just this one patch. I don't want to put any pressure on you, Paul, but we're also running out of time.
Well, 8.9 is not that bad, surely.
It is literally 0.1 away from the
Look, I mean, come on. I mean, I think we've got to apply this patch. We can't leave them unpatched. And I certainly don't think turning this compromised NMS back on is a great idea. So let's apply this patch.
Yeah, I think it's common sense. Really, have to do it manually, don't we? Now we know that it needs to be fixed. So let's see what the audience said. Go on, Paul.
And I think, frankly, Kev's team deserve the pain of having to do the overtime.
So just very quickly, so one of the things we really have to pay attention to is that whilst turning the NMS back on would give you the ability to patch very quickly, we do know that the attackers are specialists at compromising supply chain. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that they have replaced all of the Cisco firmware on your NMS, so that actually, if you were to start updating your Cisco routers from your NMS, that update itself might be further compromised. So you might be actually spreading the attacker's reach through your network by using that.
Thanks, Kev. That's absolutely terrifying. Okay, so choose option 2. Let's get that one, and we're literally right at the end now, so that's great. So yeah, it's a we don't know what the compromising LMS might mean for using it. So as Kev said, it's better to err on the side of caution. Okay. Finally, we're coming to the end. We receive an email from the FBI. They are seeing traffic from our infrastructure talking out to a known bad domain. It seems obvious from this that our network was breached and the threat actor moved laterally to establish persistence. We're now seeing other organizations disclose the impact of this compromise via hacked Office 365 and Outlook web access, and even source code breached from large software companies. We only really have one option left to us. Kev is now going to reveal that. We have to continue our investigations. It was the right answer before. It's the right answer now. Situational awareness is, in this context, is everything. We had to have all the facts to hand before we could really make decisions about what we should and shouldn't be doing. Okay, Kev, you can just come to the end here. That will bring us to the end of the scenario, and you can see these are our indicators on the right hand side. That's where we ended up, not in particularly good shape. Again, you can see how the way going through an exercise like this with the narrative twisting and turning. It's a great way to get us using our imaginations when thinking about how we might respond in the face of a cyber attack. But also, it's kind of good fun. So thanks both for your time and helping us take our audience through that. And I'm now going to pass back to Maria.
Thank you, everyone, for a great presentation. Before we have our presenters address some of the questions that have been submitted throughout the program, I want to remind you that we would love your feedback in our webinar survey to help improve our programs. And now for the first question. If I'm already using Immersive Labs, am I able to use the Cyber Crisis Simulator?
Oh, that's a really good question. This is an extra add-on as part of Immersive Labs. We can reach out to that person if they want to find out more information, but it's not part of standard Immersive Labs access. But if it's something that you want to find out more about, then we can certainly help in that regard.
Okay. Next question: how many existing scenarios are currently available to choose from in the Cyber Crisis Simulator?
So at the moment we have about 8 to 10 of these kind of standard scenarios available, but the system does allow you to define, create, and customize your own. You can customize ours. You can also create your own from scratch. So the one that we've done today is one that I've done through the customization process. So there is a way of making the scenario completely unique to your organization, to have things that are directly relevant to your organization in the scenarios, everything that helps to make it more real and more useful as an exercise for an organization is totally possible using the solution that you've seen today.
Okay, next question. Beyond being available on demand, what are the benefits of the crisis simulator over tabletop exercises?
So I suppose the key things are the dynamism. So the fact that the story can pivot around, dependent on the decisions that are made during the exercise. Traditional tabletopping, you can't really do that. And also those indicators, those sort of live indicators that show how the decisions that we made had a direct impact on, could be on things like share price or customer confidence, or we had, operational efficiency or available threat intelligence. So there's loads of ways to make it potentially, more engaging than perhaps a traditional PowerPoint-led solution. Okay.
I believe that is all the time that we have for questions today. Please join me in thanking Paul Benton, Kev Breen, and Chris Pace for their great presentation, as well as our sponsor, Immersive Labs Corporation. If you do have any additional questions or comments, please don't hesitate to click the email us button on the console. And please visit Security Magazine presentation as well as information. We appreciate your time that you have found this webinar to be a valuable experience.